Thank you, and it is a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak to you all and a virtual hello to everybody. Regulations serve multiple roles. First, and most importantly, is to protect public health and safety. They can also instill public trust in our food supply. And in addition, effective regulations can encourage innovation. Now, it's not possible for all countries to have identical regulations because different countries have differences in their existing regulatory structures and differences in their laws and enabling authorities. They may also have different regulatory triggers, either product-based, such as Canada, or process-based, such as GMO laws. Most countries have chosen to create new GMO laws, with two exceptions. The United States chose to utilize existing laws, and Canada chose a novelty approach. Although regulatory frameworks vary, there is a general agreement on requirements for food safety evaluations for rDNA products, thanks in part to Codex. Codex guidelines for food safety assessment of foods derived from rDNA animals were established in 2008 to help facilitate harmonized regulatory approaches for biotech animal products, with the key elements for assessments being the nature of the rDNA construct and its expression, and the health status of the rDNA animal, and the composition of food products. However, the pace for developing new policies has been slow. When the first animal biotech regulatory workshop was held in Argentina in 2011, very few countries had in place policies that would allow for the commercialization of animal biotech products. At that time, there had only been one regulatory decision for rDNA animals. 3 years later, there was really little advancement in policies, and there had only been 2 additional regulatory decisions. However, with the advent of genome editing, as Allison described, the global regulatory landscape for biotechnologies began to change. The question that the regulatory officials have been asking is when to regulate their products under their GMO laws. There's general agreement that the natural mutations and mutagenesis shown at the top of the screen in green are not regulated as GMOs. And there's also agreement that for products where transgenes are inserted, shown at the bottom in red, that these are regulated under GMO laws. The focus of the debate has been on these categories in the middle, shown in yellow. And the question has been where to draw the regulatory line. And for many countries, the line has been drawn at the green dash line, where below the line are templated repairs and coding for foreign DNA sequences, and these are regulated under GMO laws. And above the line are organisms that could have been created via conventional breeding, and these are regulated as conventional products, noting that this line may be somewhat fuzzy. In 2015, Argentina became the first country to publish this new approach for the regulation of products created using new technologies. They looked to the Cartagena Protocol and its definition of living modified organism, where a living modified organism, or LMO, is defined as a living organism that possesses a novel combination of genetic material obtained through use of modern biotechnology. Therefore, an organism is classified as an LMO only if it requires the use of modern biotechnology and also has a novel combination of genetic material. When we held the third workshop in 2017, the landscape had begun to change with the first 2 approvals of biotech animal for food use, and with more countries initiating policies for biotech animals and for products of genome editing. Today, many countries are putting in place regulatory approaches for products of genome editing, and the regulatory landscape is rapidly evolving, such that it has become actually quite difficult to keep this map up to date and accurate. So I apologize in advance for any inaccuracies. After Argentina and put in place their requirements, Brazil and Chile released similar approaches, and other countries in Latin America have followed their lead. Canada has a novel foods approach, and the United States updated guidances for animals, and they now allow food use animals to be considered for certain types of exclusions. Israel put in place policies with exemptions for genome-edited plants. Nigeria and Kenya and a growing number of other African countries are adopting policies that are generally in alignment with those of Argentina and Brazil. Japan has also adopted rules exempting edits from GMO requirements unless they include insertions using foreign DNA templates, and Australia is currently in the process of reviewing their biotechnology codes. In the meantime, they have exempted deletions. The Philippines and Thailand, and most recently Singapore, have adopted similar policies for plants, and animal policies are under consideration. Indonesia and India have adopted draft policies, as have China and Korea, albeit with fewer exclusions. As was just mentioned, the UK has created exclusions for plants, and animals are under consideration. Norway has proposed a tiered approach, and the EU is considering exclusions for plants. An odd one out is South Africa, where a court ruling determined that genome editing would be regulated under GMO laws. The most recent change in the landscape is New Zealand, which announced last week plans to update rules to allow for greater use of biotechnology in agriculture. As countries are developing and revising policies, it's important to understand that regulations and how they are applied or implemented shape what products are developed and who can afford to use the new technologies. For most regulatory regimes, there are essentially two potential scenarios. The first is to regulate all applications under GMO regulations with no exclusions, and the second being, if they do not contain transgenic DNA sequences, to provide exemptions to allow for their regulation as conventional products. If all products of genome editing are regulated as GMOs, then we would expect a situation similar to what we have seen with GMO products, where large multinational companies are developing high return traits for a few row crops and none for animal agriculture. However, if products that could be created via conventional breeding are regulated as products of conventional breeding, then we would predict that more products would be developed by public institutions and smaller companies, and that these would include livestock, fruits, and vegetables. I originally created this slide about 7 years ago using what I believe to be valid assumptions, but without data. And now there's clear evidence to support these expected outcomes. In 2020, the U.S. Animal Plant Inspection Service issued new rules for biotech plants that include exemptions, and the impact has been dramatic. Under the previous approach, major biotech company applications represented about 75% of the deregulations by APHIS. However, the reverse situation occurred under their modernized process. For this approach, large companies represented only about 10% of the decisions, and the vast majority were from small and medium companies. And those from public institutions also increased. Argentina observed similar results with their modernized policies. Argentina also saw a dramatic shift in the type of organisms moving through their system, with more than 25% of their applications being for fish and livestock. They also saw an increase in the diversity of traits, as has APHIS. Previously, over 90% of Argentina's approvals were for just 2 traits, herbicide tolerance and insect resistance, in a few high-value row crops. However, under their new policies, they observed that the applications are now much more diverse relative to the type of traits being created, including traits focused on animal welfare, consumer preference, and health products. I would like to challenge you to consider two more scenarios for which there is not yet data. One, where genome editing is considered as a method of producing new products versus one where genome editing is considered as being a new breeding tool. We need to recognize that how regulations are applied and implemented may also impact other protection goals and the ability to respond to agricultural threats. In the first scenario, a genome-edited animal is created, and then this trait is approved so that for that individual founder animal, and then the developer would multiply the genetics within the breeding herds, and therefore new traits would likely only be introduced for a few valuable breeds. The trait would likely not be introduced for many other breeds, as the regulatory cost would not justify it. So therefore, if a trait was one for resistance for a devastating disease, then if this disease swept through a country or region, those cows with the trait would be protected, but other breeds would not be, and their diversity would be lost. With the other scenario, regulatory decisions would be made for traits that apply to all sexually compatible breeds and species, and therefore the trait could be freely introduced into many different types of animals, and therefore you could protect a much wider variety of breeds. And then the technology would be, this type of technology would be transformative, and the traits developed by public funds would be available to farmers, and the threats could be addressed much more quickly. Today, we find ourselves at a crossroad for policies around agricultural genome editing. Countries will need to implement change to ensure that research solutions developed are actually available to farmers in time to address the problems for which they were created. To do this, we need to work together and engage in further dialogue, which I really hope this workshop will help to advance.